Every billionaire's greatest fear is watching their children grow up without knowing real love. But imagine being so wealthy that every man who approaches you might only want your fortune, leaving you to wonder if anyone could ever love your family for who they truly are. That's exactly what happened to Victoria Ashford, standing in the marble foyer of her $50 million estate in Bellmont Hills, watching her 8-year-old twins, Lily and Oliver, play alone while potential suitors discussed her net worth in hushed tones at yet another charity gala. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Victoria had never imagined that having everything would leave her feeling so empty. At 32, she was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, inheriting the Ashford technology empire after her husband Richard's sudden death in a helicopter crash 2 years ago. The media called her the Midas widow. Everything she touched turned to gold, but like the mythical king, she was discovering that unlimited wealth could become a prison of its own making. The children barely remembered their father, and Victoria watched helplessly as they grew more isolated each day. Private tutors, exclusive playdates with other wealthy families' children, and a rotation of nannies who were more interested in networking than nurturing had created a bubble around Lily and Oliver that felt more like a cage. They were polite, well-educated, and utterly lonely, living in a world where authentic human connection seemed impossible to find. Tonight's charity event was supposed to be different. Victoria's best friend and business advisor, Amanda Sterling, had convinced her to attend the annual education fundraiser at the prestigious Willowbrook Country Club. "You need to get out there," Amanda had insisted. "The children need to see you living life, not just managing it." But as Victoria watched another perfectly groomed bachelor approach with that familiar, calculating look in his eyes, she felt her heart sink deeper into disappointment. "Mrs. Ashford," the man said with practiced charm, extending a manicured hand, "Jonathan Pemberton III, I've been following your technology acquisitions. Quite impressive. Perhaps we could discuss some investment opportunities over dinner." His eyes never left hers, but Victoria noticed how he'd already glanced toward the children, likely calculating their future inheritance value. This was the reality of her world. Every introduction came with a business proposition. Every dinner invitation included a discussion of her portfolio. Every man who showed interest in her twins did so with an agenda that had nothing to do with genuine care and everything to do with access to the Ashford fortune. The children had learned to be suspicious of new faces, having overheard enough conversations to understand that people saw them as stepping stones to wealth rather than children deserving of love. Lily, with her mother's dark hair and thoughtful green eyes, had begun asking difficult questions. "Mama, why do people always want to talk about money when they meet us?" Oliver, more like his father, with sandy brown hair and an analytical mind, had started keeping a notebook where he wrote down what he called fake nice things that adults said to them. At 8 years old, they were already developing the cynical armor that protected the wealthy but prevented genuine human connection. Victoria's parents had died when she was young, and Richard's family had never approved of their marriage, viewing her middle-class background as beneath their social standards. After Richard's death, they'd made their position clear. The children belonged with their own kind, meaning boarding schools and social circles that would prepare them for lives of privilege and isolation. Victoria had fought them legally and won, but the victory felt hollow when she realized she didn't know how to give her children the normal childhood she desperately wanted for them. The Ashford mansion felt more like a museum than a home. 43 rooms, a staff of 12, and enough space for the children to go hours without seeing another soul. Victoria had grown up in a modest house in Riverside Falls, where neighbors knew each other's names and children played in backyards until their parents called them in for dinner. She wanted that warmth for Lily and Oliver, but every attempt to create normalcy was complicated by security concerns, media attention, and the reality that their faces were recognized everywhere they went. Standing in the country club's ballroom, surrounded by Crystal Springs elite, Victoria felt like an outsider in her own life. The conversation swirled around stock prices, real estate acquisitions, and political connections, while her children sat at a corner table quietly sharing a book because they'd learned that adults at these events rarely had anything interesting to say to them. She watched Oliver help Lily with a difficult word, and her heart broke a little at how they'd learned to only rely on each other. The weight of her decision pressed down on her like a physical burden. She could continue this charade of society events and suitable suitors, hoping against hope that someone genuine would appear among the fortune hunters. She could accept that her children would grow up in golden isolation, protected from financial want but starved of authentic human connection. Or she could take the terrifying step of venturing outside her social circle, risking everything she'd been taught about security and status to find something real. What Victoria didn't know was that across town in the working-class neighborhood of Maple Ridge, a man named Daniel Cooper was tucking his 7-year-old daughter Emma into bed, reading her the same story for the third time that week because it was her favorite, completely unaware that his simple, genuine love for a child was exactly what the Ashford family desperately needed. Tomorrow, their worlds would collide in a way that would challenge everything Victoria thought she knew about love, family, and what truly made someone worthy of her heart. But would a billionaire widow have the courage to choose love over security, authenticity over approval, and risk everything she'd built to give her children the one thing money couldn't buy, a father who would love them for who they were rather than what they represented? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria Ashford had never intended to become one of the most powerful women in technology. 20 years ago, she was Victoria Chen, a scholarship student at Riverside University studying computer science with dreams of creating educational software for underprivileged children. She lived in a cramped dormitory, worked nights at the campus library to pay for textbooks, and considered pizza a luxury meal reserved for special occasions. Her life changed forever during a software engineering symposium where she presented her thesis project, an adaptive learning platform that could identify struggling students and adjust teaching methods in real time. In the audience sat Richard Ashford, heir to Ashford Technology and 7 years her senior, who saw not just brilliance in her presentation, but a kindness that was rare in their competitive field. "Your algorithm doesn't just teach," Richard had said after her presentation, his blue eyes bright with genuine admiration. "It cares. That's revolutionary." Victoria had laughed, thinking he was mocking her emotional approach to technology. "Computers don't have feelings," she'd replied. "But the children using them do," Richard had countered, "and you found a way to honor that." Their courtship had been a fairy tale that made headlines in both tech journals and society magazines. Richard, despite his family's old money pretensions, had grown up feeling suffocated by expectations and traditions that valued appearance over substance. Victoria's authenticity drew him like a magnet. She challenged his assumptions, laughed at his self-importance, and showed him that intelligence paired with compassion could change the world. The Ashford family's reaction to their relationship had been swift and brutal. Eleanor Ashford, Richard's mother, had hired private investigators to dig into Victoria's background, hoping to find scandal that would derail the romance. Instead, they found a young woman who had helped her single mother run a small accounting business after her father abandoned them when Victoria was 12. They found a student who tutored struggling classmates for free and donated her prize money from coding competitions to local schools. "She's unsuitable," Eleanor had declared during a tense family dinner that Victoria still remembers with crystal clarity. Common breeding, no social connections, and frankly, too ambitious for her own good. "Richard, you could have any woman in Crystal Springs society." Richard's response had been to propose to Victoria the next week, presenting her with his grandmother's ring and a promise that their love would prove stronger than his family's prejudices. Their wedding had been a carefully orchestrated compromise, grand enough to satisfy the Ashfords' social standing, but infused with personal touches that reflected Victoria's values. Instead of elaborate floral arrangements, they'd asked guests to bring donations for local literacy programs. Rather than expensive wedding favors, they'd made charitable donations in each guest's name. Victoria had worn Eleanor's antique pearls not as submission to tradition, but as a bridge between the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. The early years of their marriage had been blissfully happy. Richard had been a genuine partner, sharing both the burdens and joys of running a technology empire while never making Victoria feel like an accessory to his success. Together, they'd transformed Ashford Technology from a stodgy hardware manufacturer into an innovative software company that specialized in educational technology. Victoria's original thesis project had become the foundation of their most successful product line, generating billions in revenue while actually improving children's learning outcomes. When the twins were born after 3 years of marriage, Victoria thought she had achieved the impossible, a perfect balance of professional success, financial security, and personal happiness. Lily arrived first, taking her time and studying the world with serious green eyes before deciding to grace it with her presence. Oliver followed 12 minutes later, impatient and energetic from his very first breath. Richard had cried when he held them, whispering promises about the adventures they'd share and the values he'd teach them. Those first few years with the babies were magical. Despite their wealth, Victoria and Richard had insisted on being hands-on parents. They'd converted one wing of their mansion into a family zone, where toys were allowed on expensive furniture, and crayon marks on walls were badges of honor rather than disasters. Victoria had continued working, but she'd also made time for playground visits, library story hours, and the kind of ordinary moments that money couldn't buy but made life worth living. Richard had been an extraordinary father, getting down on the floor to build elaborate block cities with Oliver while teaching Lily to paint watercolor landscapes in their garden. He'd read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, helped with finger painting projects that inevitably ended with more paint on him than on the paper, and insisted that their children grow up understanding that their privilege came with responsibility to help others. The technology company had thrived under their joint leadership. Victoria's innovative approach to adaptive learning had revolutionized educational software, while Richard's business acumen had ensured their products reached the children who needed them most. They'd established scholarship programs, donated equipment to underfunded schools, and created internship opportunities for students from backgrounds similar to Victoria's own. But success in business and parenthood couldn't protect them from the random cruelty of fate. Richard's helicopter crash had been swift and senseless, a mechanical failure during what should have been a routine flight to inspect a new facility. One moment, Victoria had been kissing him goodbye in their kitchen, watching him ruffle the twins' hair as he promised to bring them souvenirs from Sacramento. The next, she was receiving a phone call that shattered her world into pieces she still hadn't figured out how to put back together. The grief had been overwhelming, but the immediate practical challenges had been almost worse. Suddenly, Victoria was solely responsible for a multi-billion-dollar company, 2 traumatized children, and a social position she'd never wanted in the first place. The board of directors had questioned whether a woman could handle the technical and financial pressures of running Ashford Technology. Richard's family had swooped in with opinions about everything from the children's education to Victoria's capacity for leadership. Eleanor Ashford had been particularly ruthless in her grief, suggesting that the twins would be better served by boarding school and professional caregivers while Victoria focused on maintaining Richard's legacy. The implication was clear. Victoria was viewed as a temporary custodian rather than the rightful heir to the life she and Richard had built together. Fighting for her family's autonomy while managing her own grief had required reserves of strength Victoria hadn't known she possessed. She'd proven her business competence by expanding Ashford Technology's market share and maintaining their commitment to educational equity. She'd proven her parenting dedication by refusing every suggestion that her children belonged anywhere but with her. But in winning those battles, she'd somehow lost the war against loneliness that now threatened to consume them all. Standing in her home office 2 years later, looking at family photos that seemed to mock her current isolation, Victoria realized that success and security meant nothing if her children grew up believing that love was a transaction rather than a gift. She had everything money could buy, but she was failing to give Lily and Oliver the one thing they needed most, the simple, uncomplicated love of a father who would choose them every day, not because of what they represented, but because of who they were. What she didn't know was that tomorrow, a chance encounter would introduce her to a man whose love for his own daughter would show her exactly what she'd been searching for, even if he came from a world her current circle would never accept. The rain was falling steadily on that Tuesday morning when Victoria's carefully controlled world began to unravel in the most unexpected way. She had left Bellmont Hills early to avoid the usual traffic, planning to arrive at the Riverside Elementary School dedication ceremony with enough time to review her speech. The new computer lab, funded entirely by the Ashford Foundation, represented her attempt to honor Richard's memory while giving underprivileged children access to the same educational technology that had built their fortune. What Victoria hadn't anticipated was the construction detour that would route her through Maple Ridge, the working-class neighborhood she'd grown up in but hadn't visited in over a decade. As her black Tesla navigated the narrow streets lined with modest houses and corner stores, memories flooded back of a simpler time when happiness wasn't measured by stock prices or social standing. The accident happened in slow motion. A delivery truck ran a red light at the intersection of Pine Street and Oakwood Avenue, slamming into the side of Victoria's car with enough force to deploy the airbags and leave her dazed but conscious. Through the spider-webbed passenger window, she could see concerned faces gathering, hear voices asking if she was okay, smell the acrid scent of deployed safety systems. "Ma'am, don't try to move yet," a calm voice instructed from her driver's side. Victoria turned her head carefully to see a man in his early 30s with kind brown eyes and carpenter's hands gently checking her pulse through the broken window. "My name's Daniel Cooper. I'm a certified EMT and I called 911. Help is on the way." Daniel's presence was immediately reassuring in a way Victoria couldn't explain. There was no recognition in his eyes, no calculation about who she might be or what she might be worth. He simply saw someone who needed help and responded with competent compassion. As he kept her talking while they waited for the ambulance, asking about any pain or dizziness, Victoria found herself studying his face with unusual clarity. He had the weathered hands of someone who worked with tools, laugh lines around his eyes that suggested frequent smiling, and a gentle manner that reminded her of Richard's natural kindness. When the paramedics arrived, Daniel stepped back respectfully but remained nearby until they confirmed Victoria's injuries were minor, a slight concussion, some bruising from the seatbelt, nothing that required hospitalization. "Thank you," Victoria said as the EMTs finished their assessment. She was sitting on the curb now, her expensive suit torn and her perfectly styled hair disheveled, but feeling more grounded than she had in months. "You didn't have to stay, but I'm grateful you did." Daniel smiled, and Victoria noticed how it transformed his entire face. "My daughter Emma always says that helping people is what good neighbors do. I was just being a good neighbor." He glanced at his watch and grimaced slightly. "Speaking of Emma, I need to get to her school. She's in the after-school program, and they'll worry if I'm late." The mention of his daughter sparked Victoria's curiosity. "How old is Emma?" 7 going on 17, Daniel replied with obvious pride. "Smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. She keeps me on my toes." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Listen, I know this probably sounds strange, but you look familiar. Do you live around here?" Victoria realized this was the moment of truth. She could identify herself as the Victoria Ashford, retreat into her world of privilege and protection, and let this encounter become just another brief intersection with ordinary life. Or she could choose to be vulnerable, to admit that she'd once belonged to this neighborhood and these values. "I grew up on Elmwood Street," she said quietly. "My mother ran Chen's accounting from the house with the blue shutters. I haven't been back in a long time." Daniel's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Mrs. Chen was your mom? She helped my dad with his taxes for years when he was starting his handyman business. Always refused to take full payment, said she was just helping neighbors. I should have recognized the kindness in your eyes. You have her smile. The words hit Victoria with unexpected emotional force. No one in her current life had ever compared her to her mother, had ever seen past her wealth to recognize the values that had shaped her. In Crystal Springs society, her humble origins were either ignored or viewed as obstacles she'd overcome, rather than foundations that had built her character. She was a good woman, Victoria managed, surprised by the thickness in her voice. She taught me that success meant nothing if you didn't use it to help others. Sounds like Emma would love to meet you sometime, Daniel said spontaneously. She's always asking about people who grew up here and made something of themselves. She has big dreams for a 7-year-old. He paused, seeming to realize he'd been presumptuous. I mean, if you ever find yourself in the neighborhood again. Before Victoria could respond, her phone rang with Amanda's ringtone. Reality crashed back as she remembered the dedication ceremony, the waiting crowd, the speech she was supposed to give in less than an hour. I have to take this, she apologized, but Daniel was already stepping away with an understanding nod. Take care of that concussion, he called over his shoulder, and maybe think about visiting Mrs. Rodriguez at the corner market. She knew your mom too, and she'd love to catch up. Victoria watched him walk away, noticing how he stopped to help an elderly man carry groceries to his car, how he waved to children playing in a nearby yard, how he moved through this neighborhood like someone who belonged, not because of what he owned, but because of who he was to the people around him. The phone call with Amanda was a blur of rescheduled meetings and concerned questions about her well-being. A replacement car arrived within minutes, whisking Victoria back to her world of scheduled obligations and careful appearances. But throughout the dedication ceremony, as she spoke about the importance of educational equity and technological access, her mind kept drifting to Daniel Cooper's genuine smile and the easy way he'd talked about his daughter. That evening, as Victoria helped Lily and Oliver with their homework in the mansion study, she found herself thinking about Emma Cooper and wondering what it would be like to have a father who described you with such obvious pride and affection. She watched her own children work quietly at the enormous mahogany table, brilliant and well-behaved, but carrying with the careful reserve of children who've learned that attention often came with strings attached. Mama, Lily said during a break from her mathematics problems, at the dedication ceremony today, did you meet any children who were happy? The question caught Victoria off guard. What do you mean, sweetheart? The children in the pictures of the school, Oliver clarified. They looked different from us. They looked like they weren't worried about anything except having fun. Victoria stared at her children, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in months. Despite every advantage money could provide, Lily and Oliver carried themselves like small adults, constantly aware of expectations and appearances. They were missing the carefree joy that should have been their birthright, the simple security of knowing they were loved for who they were rather than what they represented. The accident that morning hadn't just been a collision between two vehicles. It had been a collision between two worlds, two ways of understanding what made life worth living. And for the first time since Richard's death, Victoria found herself questioning whether the path she'd chosen for her family was leading them toward happiness or away from it. She didn't know that across town, Daniel Cooper was tucking Emma into bed and telling her about the kind lady he'd helped that day, or that Emma was falling asleep wondering if the lady had children who might want to play with her sometime. She didn't know that their brief encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, family, and what truly made someone worthy of her heart. But she was beginning to suspect that the life she'd built, for all its security and success, might be missing the most important element of all, the kind of authentic human connection that couldn't be bought, only earned through the daily choice to value people over possessions, relationships over reputation, and love over everything else. The weeks following the accident brought a series of revelations that shattered Victoria's carefully maintained illusions about her family's happiness. It started with small things, Lily asking why they couldn't have playdates at their house like normal kids, Oliver wondering aloud why their bodyguard Marcus had to follow them everywhere, even to the bathroom at restaurants. But it was Emma Cooper's innocent question, delivered through a crayon-scrawled note that Daniel had awkwardly handed Victoria during their second-chance encounter at the grocery store, that truly opened Victoria's eyes to what her children were missing. "Dear rich lady," the note read in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "my daddy said you were very nice when you had your car accident. Do your kids want to come play at our house? We have a tire swing and my daddy makes the best chocolate chip cookies. Love, Emma Cooper. P.S. Daddy says you knew my Grandpa Joe. He would have liked you." Victoria had stared at the note for a full minute while standing in the organic produce section of Riverside Market, Daniel shifting uncomfortably beside her as other shoppers maneuvered around them with their carts. The simple invitation, so pure in its intent, so free of ulterior motives, highlighted everything that was wrong with her children's social isolation. "She's been asking about you since I mentioned the accident," Daniel explained, his cheeks slightly red with embarrassment. "I probably shouldn't have said anything, but Emma has this way of getting information out of me. She's been planning this playdate in her head for 2 weeks." "Your daughter wants to play with my children," Victoria repeated slowly, as if testing the words for hidden meanings. "She doesn't know who I am, does she?" Daniel's confusion was genuine. Should she? I mean, I know you're successful. The car, the clothes, the way you carry yourself. But Emma just sees another mom who might have kids who want to swing on our tire swing. That evening, Victoria had shown the note to Lily and Oliver during dinner in their formal dining room, where the 3 of them sat at opposite ends of a table designed to seat 20. The children's faces had lit up with an excitement Victoria hadn't seen in months, followed immediately by the cautious hope of children who'd learned not to expect too much. "She has a tire swing?" Lily asked wistfully. "I've always wanted to try a tire swing." "And her daddy makes cookies?" Oliver added, his practical mind already working. "Real cookies, not the ones the chef makes with organic flour and reduced sugar." Victoria had felt something crack inside her chest. When had her children's lives become so sanitized, so removed from simple pleasures, that a tire swing and homemade cookies seemed like exotic luxuries? She'd spent 2 years building walls to protect them from potential fortune hunters, but in doing so, she'd also built walls that kept out genuine friendship and innocent joy. The breaking point came 3 days later during what should have been a routine visit to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the child psychologist Victoria had been consulting since Richard's death. Dr. Hendricks had initially helped the twins process their grief, but their recent sessions had taken a concerning turn. "I'm worried about their social development," Dr. Hendricks said during their private consultation, her kind face serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Lily and Oliver are incredibly bright, but they're developing what I call wealth anxiety, a hypervigilance about people's motives that's unusual in children their age." Victoria felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Yesterday, Oliver told me about a new security guard who complimented his science project. Instead of feeling proud, Oliver spent 20 minutes analyzing whether the guard was trying to get close to Mama's money. That's not normal childhood thinking, Victoria. 8-year-olds should be able to accept compliments without calculating hidden agendas." Dr. Hendricks pulled out her notes from the previous session. "Lily drew a picture of your house, but she surrounded it with what she called safe walls. When I asked her what they kept out, she said fake people who pretend to like us. These children are developing a fortress mentality that's going to impact their ability to form healthy relationships as they grow up." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She'd been so focused on protecting her children from exploitation that she'd inadvertently taught them to suspect everyone's motives, to view the world as inherently threatening rather than potentially wonderful. Dr. Hendricks continued gently. "They need authentic interactions with people who want nothing from your family except friendship. They need to experience unconditional acceptance, to learn that they're worthy of love simply because of who they are, not what they represent. That night, Victoria found herself walking through the mansion's 43 rooms, seeing them through her children's eyes. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a museum where three people lived separate lives, connected only by shared grief and mutual protection. She passed the formal living room that no one ever used, the library filled with books chosen for their impressive spines rather than their readability, the game room where expensive toys sat untouched because they felt too valuable to actually play with. She discovered Lily in her bedroom, not sleeping, but sitting by the window with her art supplies, painting what looked like children playing in a yard. The scene was vibrant and joyful, full of details that suggested careful observation rather than imagination. "Where did you see this, sweetheart?" Victoria asked, settling beside her daughter on the window seat. "I watched from Marcus's car when we drove through the neighborhood where you had your accident," Lily admitted quietly. "The children there looked so happy. They weren't worried about getting their clothes dirty or being polite to grown-ups they didn't know. They were just free." Victoria's heart broke a little more. Her daughter was painting childhood freedom like something exotic and unattainable, observing joy from behind tinted windows and bulletproof glass. The final revelation came when Oliver appeared in the doorway, clutching the tablet where he'd been researching Daniel Cooper. Victoria's security team conducted background checks on everyone who came into contact with the family, but Oliver had apparently decided to do his own investigation. "Mama," he said with the serious expression he'd inherited from Richard, "I looked up Emma's daddy online. He's a carpenter and an EMT, and he volunteers at the fire station, and he coaches Little League baseball for free. The internet says he's a good person who helps people." Victoria stared at her son, realizing that an 8-year-old shouldn't need to research someone's character before believing they might be genuine. The fact that Oliver felt compelled to verify Daniel's goodness spoke volumes about how suspicious and isolated their world had become. "He also has a food truck on weekends," Oliver continued, scrolling through his research. "People write reviews that say he makes them feel like family, even though they just met him. And Emma goes to regular public school, and she has lots of friends, and she plays soccer and takes art classes at the community center." The contrast was stark and painful. Emma Cooper lived a rich life filled with community connections, diverse friendships, and simple pleasures, while Lily and Oliver existed in golden isolation, surrounded by luxury but starved of authentic human connection. Victoria made a decision that night that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Sitting in her home office, staring at Emma's crayon invitation propped against her computer screen, she realized that her children's emotional well-being was more important than her fears about their physical security or social status. She picked up her phone and dialed the number Daniel had awkwardly given her at the grocery store, her hands trembling as she prepared to step outside the protective bubble she'd built around her family. "Daniel," she said when he answered on the third ring, "it's Victoria Ashford. I was wondering if that playdate invitation was still open." The surprised joy in his voice was immediate and infectious. "Emma's going to be thrilled. She's been asking about it every day." As Victoria hung up the phone, she realized she was embarking on something far more dangerous than any business venture or financial risk she'd ever taken. She was choosing to trust a stranger with her children's hearts, to step into a world where her wealth and status meant nothing, where she would be judged solely on her character and the authenticity of her intentions. What she didn't know was that this single phone call would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge every assumption she'd made about love, family, and what it meant to truly protect the people she cherished most. The playdate at Daniel Cooper's house shattered every remaining illusion Victoria had about the life she'd built for her children. Standing in the doorway of the modest two-bedroom home on Depot Street, watching Lily and Oliver experiencing pure, uninhibited joy for the first time in 2 years, Victoria felt the full weight of how completely she'd failed them in her desperate attempt to protect them. Daniel's house was everything the Ashford mansion wasn't: Small, warm, lived in, and filled with the kind of authentic happiness that couldn't be purchased or orchestrated. The living room furniture showed gentle wear from actual use. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator with proud abundance, and the whole space radiated the comfortable security of a home where people truly belonged to each other. Within 5 minutes of arrival, Lily was giggling helplessly as Emma taught her to slide down the hallway and sock feet, a simple pleasure that would have been impossible on the mansion's marble floors. Oliver had discovered Daniel's workshop in the garage, where real tools and half-finished projects demonstrated that this was a place where things were built with hands and patience rather than simply purchased with money. "Your kids haven't done this before," Daniel observed quietly, standing beside Victoria as they watched Emma show Lily how to properly swing on the tire swing he'd hung from the massive oak tree in their backyard. Victoria's throat felt tight as she watched her daughter's face transform with delight. "We have playground equipment at home," she said defensively, then realized how hollow that sounded. "But it's different when there's no one to play with." Daniel nodded with understanding rather than judgment. "Emma used to be shy too, before we started having neighborhood kids over. Sometimes the best gift you can give a child is other children to be children with." The afternoon progressed like a revelation of everything her children had been missing. Emma, with the natural confidence of a child who'd never doubted her worth, drew Lily and Oliver into games that had no rules except fun. They played hide-and-seek in a house small enough that everyone could be found within minutes, built blanket forts in the living room, and helped Daniel make cookies from a recipe that prioritized taste over nutritional perfection. Victoria found herself studying Daniel's parenting style with growing amazement. He was present without hovering, protective without controlling, and engaged with Emma's world in a way that made his daughter his priority rather than his obligation. When Oliver asked endless questions about how the tire swing worked, Daniel didn't just answer. He brought out pencils and paper to draw diagrams, turning curiosity into an improvised engineering lesson. "Emma's mom died when she was 3, Daniel mentioned quietly while the children were occupied with their cookie decorating project. "Leukemia. I know it's not the same as losing a spouse, but I understand something about trying to be enough for kids who've lost half their world." Victoria felt a shock of recognition and something deeper, the first genuine understanding she'd experienced since Richard's death. Here was someone who truly comprehended the weight of single parenthood, the constant fear of making the wrong choices, the desperate desire to fill gaps that seemed impossibly vast. "How do you do it?" she asked, watching Emma climb onto Daniel's lap to show him her cookie masterpiece. "How do you make her feel so secure when there's only one of you?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "I think the key is remembering that love multiplies when you share it. It doesn't divide. Emma has me, but she also has Mrs. Rodriguez, who babysits sometimes, and Coach Martinez from soccer, and her teacher, Miss Patricia, who stays late to help with reading. It takes a village, but you have to be willing to trust the village." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on protecting her children from the world that she'd prevented them from forming the very connections that would teach them to navigate it. Her children had her, but they didn't have a village. They had employees, tutors, and supervised interactions that served their education, but not their hearts. The breaking point came when it was time to leave. Lily and Oliver's faces fell with such obvious disappointment that Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. They moved reluctantly toward the door, their shoulders slumping as they returned to their roles as the careful, controlled Ashford children. "Thank you for having us," Lily said politely to Daniel, the formal courtesy learned from countless adult interactions replacing the natural enthusiasm she'd shown all afternoon. "Thank you for the cookies and the tire swing," Oliver added with equal formality, his spontaneous engineering questions forgotten as he remembered how to behave like a representative of the Ashford family rather than simply a curious 8-year-old. Emma, oblivious to the social transformation happening before her eyes, hugged both twins with fierce affection. "This was the best play date ever. When can you come back? Maybe next time we can have a sleepover." Victoria watched her children's faces brighten momentarily before the careful mask slipped back into place. They knew better than to make promises about future playdates, had learned through experience that such hopes were usually disappointed by schedule conflicts or security concerns or the mysterious adult reasons that kept them separated from normal childhood experiences. The drive home was silent except for the quiet sounds of her children's suppressed disappointment. Victoria kept glancing in the rearview mirror, seeing Lily staring out the window with tears she was too well trained to shed. Oliver clutching a cookie Daniel had wrapped for him as if it were a talisman from a magical world he might never visit again. As they pulled through the gates of the Ashford estate, the mansion loomed before them like a beautiful prison. The manicured grounds that had once represented success now seemed sterile and isolated. The security measures that had once provided peace of mind now felt like barriers separating her children from the very experiences that would teach them how to be happy. That night, Victoria made a discovery that would haunt her for weeks to come. Unable to sleep, she'd gone to check on the children and found them both in Oliver's room, whispering quietly in the dark. "Do you think Emma's daddy would want to be our daddy too?" Lily was asking with heartbreaking hope. "Maybe," Oliver replied thoughtfully. "He didn't ask us any questions about money or try to impress Mama. He just acted like we were regular kids." "I liked being regular kids," Lily whispered. "I liked not worrying about whether we were being good enough or smart enough or polite enough. I just liked playing." Victoria pressed herself against the wall outside their door, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her children articulate everything she'd failed to understand. They weren't asking for more toys or bigger rooms or expensive experiences. They were asking for the simple freedom to be children, to make mistakes, to be loved unconditionally rather than protected conditionally. The final blow came when she heard Oliver's quiet voice in the darkness. "Do you think Daddy would be sad that we're sad so much? I try to remember him being happy, but all I can remember is being worried about making Mama more sad." Victoria's legs gave out, and she slid down the wall to sit on the hallway floor, understanding with devastating clarity that her grief had become their burden, her fear had become their prison, and her love had somehow transformed into the very force that was preventing them from thriving. She'd spent 2 years believing that providing for her children meant giving them every material advantage, every educational opportunity, every security measure money could buy. But sitting on the floor outside their bedroom, listening to them whisper about the simple joy they'd experienced in Daniel Cooper's modest home, Victoria realized she'd been focused on the wrong kind of provision entirely. Her children didn't need more protection from the world, they needed more connection to it. They didn't need bigger houses or better schools or more expensive toys. They needed what Emma Cooper had. A parent who understood that love meant creating space for joy, not building walls against sorrow. As Victoria finally made her way to her own bedroom, passing Richard's empty study and the family photos that seemed to mock her current failures, she understood that she'd reached the absolute bottom of her journey as a mother. She'd tried so hard to keep her children safe that she'd forgotten to help them live. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to continue building higher walls around their golden cage or find the courage to tear them down and trust that teaching her children to navigate the world with open hearts was worth more than protecting them from every possible disappointment. The choice would determine not just their future happiness, but whether the love Richard had died believing in could survive the fear his death had created. Victoria's transformation began with small acts of rebellion against the fortress she'd built around her family. The morning after overhearing her children's whispered conversation, she walked into the kitchen where Chef Laurent was preparing their usual breakfast of organic steel-cut oats with precisely measured fruits and dismissed him for the day. Instead, she stood at the stove herself, attempting to recreate Daniel's chocolate chip pancakes from memory while Lily and Oliver watched in amazement. "Mama, you're cooking?" Lily asked, her voice filled with wonder as if witnessing something miraculous. "I used to cook all the time when I was your age," Victoria replied, flipping a slightly lopsided pancake that bore no resemblance to the perfect circles Chef Laurent produced. My mother taught me that food tastes better when it's made with love instead of just skill. The pancakes were imperfect. Some burnt around the edges, others undercooked in the middle, but the children devoured them with genuine enthusiasm. Oliver even asked for seconds, something he'd never done with any of Chef Laurent's nutritionally optimized creations. As they ate, Victoria found herself telling stories about her childhood that she'd buried under layers of social advancement and professional success. The second change came when Victoria canceled their scheduled etiquette lessons with Mrs. Pemberton, the stern instructor who'd been teaching the twins proper deportment for social functions. Instead, she enrolled them in the same community soccer league where Emma Cooper played, despite the security team's concerns about mixing with unvetted children. "These kids aren't a threat," Victoria told Marcus, their head of security, as they sat in the parking lot of Riverside Community Center watching dozens of children run chaotically across the field. "They're exactly what my children need, other kids who want nothing more than to kick a ball and have fun." Watching Lily tentatively join a group of girls practicing headers while Oliver gravitated toward a cluster of boys arguing about strategy, Victoria felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in 2 years, her children were interacting with peers who knew nothing about the Ashfords' fortune, who saw them simply as new teammates to welcome or competitors to challenge. The transformation wasn't immediate or smooth. Lily struggled with the physical demands of soccer, having spent most of her life in sedentary activities designed to develop her mind rather than her body. Oliver's tendency to overanalyze situations made him hesitant on the field, where split-second decisions mattered more than careful calculation. But slowly, gradually, Victoria watched them begin to relax into the simple joy of running, sweating, and belonging to something larger than themselves. Emma Cooper's presence on the team created an unexpected bridge between Victoria's old world and her emerging new one. The 7-year-old welcomed the twins with uncomplicated enthusiasm, defending Lily when she missed an easy goal and encouraging Oliver when he hung back during scrimmages. Her natural leadership and generous spirit reminded Victoria of what childhood friendship could look like when it wasn't filtered through social status or parental agendas. "Emma's really good at making people feel included," Victoria mentioned to Daniel after a particularly challenging practice where Lily had been overwhelmed by the more aggressive players. Daniel, who was helping pack equipment with the easy familiarity of someone who'd volunteered for every team function, smiled with obvious pride. She learned that from watching her teammates struggle when she first started. Emma figured out that soccer is more fun when everyone gets to participate, not just the naturally gifted kids. The comment highlighted something Victoria was slowly learning, that her children's emotional education had been neglected in favor of their academic advancement. They knew calculus and classical literature, but they'd never learned how to comfort a friend, how to lose gracefully, or how to celebrate someone else's success without calculating what it meant for their own standing. Victoria's third major change involved the mansion itself. Instead of maintaining the museum-like perfection that had characterized their home life, she began encouraging mess and spontaneity. She converted one of the formal sitting rooms into a proper playroom, where toys could be scattered and forgotten, where art projects could remain half-finished on tables, where the children could build blanket forts without worrying about damaging expensive furniture. The staff's reaction to these changes ranged from confusion to gentle resistance. Maria, the head housekeeper, struggled to understand why Victoria wanted fingerprints left on windows and crayon marks preserved on walls. Jeffrey, the estate manager, questioned the wisdom of allowing unknown children to visit for playdates that couldn't be properly supervised or controlled. "With respect, Mrs. Ashford," Jeffrey said during one of their weekly planning meetings, "these changes are creating security vulnerabilities and social complications that could reflect poorly on the family's reputation." Victoria looked around the conference room where they held these meetings, a sterile space that perfectly represented everything she was trying to move away from, and made another impulsive decision. "Jeffrey, I'm less concerned about our reputation than I am about my children's happiness. Cancel these formal meetings. If something urgent comes up, we can discuss it in the kitchen while I'm making lunch." The suggestion clearly horrified Jeffrey, but Victoria found herself energized by the small act of rebellion. She was beginning to understand that every formal protocol, every security measure, Every social expectation she'd accepted was another barrier between her family and the authentic life she wanted them to experience. The most significant change came when Victoria decided to reduce the children's private tutoring and enroll them in Riverside Elementary, the same public school that Emma attended. The decision sparked fierce opposition from both her security team and the Ashford family's educational consultants. "Victoria, darling, surely you're not serious," Eleanor Ashford said during a tense phone conversation. "Public school, with all those ordinary children. Lily and Oliver need to be prepared for their social responsibilities, not mixing with children who can't possibly understand their obligations." "Their only obligation is to be happy, healthy children," Victoria replied firmly. "Everything else is something I imposed on them, not something they chose for themselves." The enrollment process at Riverside Elementary was both humbling and liberating. Principal Martinez, a warm woman in her 50s who dedicated her career to serving underprivileged communities, treated Victoria with professional courtesy but no special deference. The school's modest facilities, aging computers, well-worn textbooks, cramped classrooms, stood in stark contrast to the luxury educational environments Victoria had been considering. "Our students may not have every advantage," Principal Martinez explained as they toured the building, "but they learned resilience, creativity, and the value of working together. Sometimes the best education comes from struggling alongside your peers rather than being protected from every difficulty." Lily and Oliver's first day at Riverside Elementary was perhaps the most terrifying experience of Victoria's life as a mother. She watched them walk through the school's front doors carrying simple backpacks instead of designer bags, wearing clothes chosen for comfort rather than impression, looking like ordinary 8-year-olds for the first time since Richard's death. That afternoon, when she picked them up, Victoria barely recognized her children. They were disheveled, excited, and talking over each other in their eagerness to share the day's experiences. Oliver had discovered that his mathematical abilities made him a valuable partner for group projects, while Lily had found kindred spirits in the art corner who appreciated her talent without knowing about her expensive private lessons. "Mama, guess what?" Lily said as they drove home through neighborhoods Victoria was beginning to see differently. "My teacher said I could help paint the mural in the hallway, and there's a girl named Rosa who draws even better than me, and she's going to teach me how to make shadows look real." "And we're doing a science fair," Oliver added enthusiastically, "and Emma's dad said he'd help us build a volcano that actually erupts, and there's this kid Marcus who knows everything about rockets." Victoria listened to their chatter with a mixture of joy and regret. Joy at seeing them so animated and engaged, regret at understanding how much authentic excitement had been missing from their carefully curated lives. They were discovering that learning was fun when it involved collaboration rather than competition, that achievements felt better when they were shared rather than awarded in isolation. As they pulled into their estate that evening, Victoria realized they were living between two worlds, returning each night to privilege and luxury, but spending their days in an environment that valued character over credentials, effort over excellence, belonging over achievement. The contrast was becoming more apparent to the children, who increasingly seemed like visitors in their own mansion rather than natural inhabitants. That night, as Victoria tucked them into beds that cost more than most families' annual income, she listened to their prayers with new understanding. Instead of the formal gratitude they'd been taught to express, she heard genuine thankfulness for friends who liked them, teachers who believed in them, and experiences that challenged them in ways that felt meaningful rather than obligatory. The adaptation phase was teaching Victoria that happiness couldn't be purchased or planned. It had to be discovered through the messy, imperfect process of genuine human connection. Her children were learning to navigate a world that judged them by their actions rather than their inheritance, and in doing so, they were becoming the kind of people Richard would have been proud to know. The revelation that would change everything came on an ordinary Thursday evening in November, hidden inside what appeared to be a routine business crisis. Victoria was reviewing quarterly reports in her home office when Amanda Sterling burst in without her usual professional composure, clutching a manila folder that trembled in her hands. "Victoria, we have a problem," Amanda said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "A big one. Jonathan Blackstone is making a play for Ashford Technology, and he's not just after the company. He's been building a case for why you're an unfit guardian for the twins." Victoria's blood turned to ice. Jonathan Blackstone was Richard's cousin, a ruthless corporate lawyer who'd always resented being excluded from the Ashford inheritance. He'd challenged Richard's will unsuccessfully, but apparently hadn't given up his ambitions to control the family fortune. "What kind of case?" Victoria asked, though she dreaded the answer. Amanda spread documents across the desk with shaking hands. "He's hired private investigators. They have photographs of the children at public school, at the community center, playing with unsuitable companions. He's claiming you've become mentally unstable since Richard's death, that you're exposing Lily and Oliver to dangerous environments and inappropriate influences." The photographs were damning in their ordinariness. Lily laughing as she kicked a soccer ball, her uniform grass-stained and her hair escaping from its ponytail. Oliver building something in Daniel's garage, covered in sawdust and grinning with accomplishment. Both children eating ice cream at a neighborhood festival, surrounded by families that clearly didn't belong to Crystal Springs society. "There's more," Amanda continued reluctantly. "He's documented your friendship with Daniel Cooper, background checks, financial records, everything. He's painting Daniel as a fortune hunter who's manipulated you into compromising the children's security and social standing." Victoria stared at a surveillance photo of herself and Daniel watching their children play at the community park, both of them laughing at something Emma had said. The image that had felt like a moment of pure happiness now looked sinister through Blackstone's lens, a vulnerable widow being exploited by a calculating opportunist. "He's filed for emergency custody," Amanda said quietly. "The hearing is scheduled for next week. Victoria, he has a strong case. The court will look at the children's previous lifestyle, private tutors, security, social connections, and compare it to this." She gestured at the photographs. "They'll see children who've gone from protected environments to what looks like neglect." The irony was devastating. Just as Victoria had discovered what her children truly needed, someone was using that discovery to destroy their family. The very changes that had brought Lily and Oliver back to life were being weaponized against her as evidence of incompetence. "There's something else," Amanda said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Blackstone isn't working alone. Eleanor Ashford is backing him financially. She's convinced the court that she can provide a more stable environment for the children." Victoria felt the room spin around her. Richard's mother, who had barely tolerated Victoria during their marriage, was now actively working to remove her grandchildren from her care. The woman who had criticized every parenting decision Victoria made was positioning herself as the children's savior. That night, Victoria called an emergency meeting with her legal team, but their assessment was grimmer than she'd hoped. Thomas Hartwell, her lead attorney, reviewed Blackstone's filing with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "He's built a compelling narrative," Thomas admitted reluctantly. "Grieving widow loses judgment, makes impulsive decisions that compromise her children's welfare. The fact that you dismissed security personnel, enrolled them in public school, and developed a relationship with someone from a completely different social class plays directly into his argument." "What relationship?" Victoria demanded. "Daniel and I are friends. Our children are friends. There's nothing inappropriate happening." "That's not how it will look to the court," Thomas replied gently. "A billionaire widow becoming involved with a working-class single father? The optics suggest either poor judgment or exploitation. Either way, it supports Blackstone's case that you're not making decisions in the children's best interests." Victoria spent that night walking through her mansion, seeing it through the eyes of a family court judge. The expensive security system she'd disabled. The formal dining room now used for homework sessions. The playroom created from a priceless antique sitting room. Every change she'd made to create a more nurturing environment could be interpreted as careless destruction of valuable assets. The cruelest part was realizing that Blackstone's accusations contained grains of truth twisted into weapons. She had been making impulsive decisions. She had been ignoring traditional security protocols. She had been allowing her children to associate with people who hadn't been thoroughly vetted by professionals. But she'd also been watching Lily and Oliver become genuinely happy for the first time since their father's death. She'd seen them develop real friendships, discover their own capabilities, and learn to navigate the world with confidence rather than fear. How could she explain to a court that love sometimes looked like chaos, that growth required risk, that protecting children from all difficulty was actually a form of harm? The breaking point came when she found Lily and Oliver in the kitchen the next morning, quietly eating cereal and radiating the kind of subdued anxiety that indicated they'd overheard adult conversations they weren't supposed to understand. "Mama," Lily said carefully, "are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong by making friends at school?" Oliver added. His young face creased with worry that belonged on someone decades older. Victoria realized with devastating clarity that her children were already beginning to retreat into the careful, guarded behavior that had characterized their lives before Daniel and Emma entered their world. They were learning, once again, that happiness came with consequences, that spontaneity was dangerous, that love could be taken away without warning. That afternoon, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of preparing for a legal battle that would drag her children through months of scrutiny and judgment, instead of hiring more attorneys and private investigators to counter Blackstone's narrative, Victoria chose a different path entirely. She called Daniel. "I need to see you," she said when he answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's something you need to know about my family, about who I really am, and about what being part of our lives might cost you." They met at Riverside Park, where Emma and the twins were scheduled to practice soccer. Victoria arrived early and sat on a bench, watching Daniel approach across the grass with Emma skipping beside him, both of them radiating the uncomplicated happiness I was about to destroy. "Victoria, you look like someone died," Daniel said, settling beside her while Emma ran off to join other children on the playground. "What's wrong?"
Victoria took a deep breath and began to tell him everything about the Ashford fortune, about the custody battle, about how his friendship with her family was being used as evidence of her unfitness as a mother. She watched his face change as he understood the magnitude of what she was saying, saw the exact moment when he realized that loving her children came with a price he'd never imagined. "You're telling me," Daniel said slowly, "that because I care about you and the kids, some lawyer thinks he can take them away from you?" "Not just any lawyer," Victoria replied. "Richard's cousin, backed by his mother and half the Crystal Springs legal establishment. They have photographs, financial records, character assessments. They're building a case that I've lost my judgment and that you're either taking advantage of me or I'm putting the children at risk by associating with you." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma push Lily on the swing set while Oliver attempted to climb the monkey bars with characteristic determination. "So, what happens now?" he asked finally. Victoria felt tears threaten as she realized what she had to do. "I think I have to choose between fighting this battle and protecting my children from it. And I think protecting them means ending whatever this is between us before it destroys their chance at staying with me." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence, marking the end of the brief, shining period when Victoria had believed that love might be enough to overcome the complications of wealth and social expectations. She was about to learn whether the happiness she'd found was strong enough to survive the forces determined to destroy it, or whether some bridges between worlds were simply too dangerous to cross. Daniel's response to Victoria's revelation shattered every assumption she'd made about how people reacted to extreme wealth and its complications. Instead of the anger, intimidation, or calculation she'd learned to expect, he simply looked tired, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd faced impossible choices before and understood their weight. "So, let me get this straight," Daniel said, his voice carefully controlled as they sat on the park bench watching their children play with heartbreaking normalcy. "Because I helped you after a car accident? Because I invited your kids to play at our house? Because I care about all of you? That's somehow evidence that you're an unfit mother?" "It's not just about caring," Victoria said, her own voice cracking with the strain of explaining a system that had never made sense to her either. "It's about the appearance of impropriety. A billionaire widow developing feelings for a working-class single father? In their world, it's either evidence of my mental instability or proof that you're manipulating me for financial gain." Daniel stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps before turning back to face her. "And what do you think? Do you think I'm some kind of opportunist who saw dollar signs when I met you?" The question hung between them like a test, and Victoria realized that her answer would determine not just their future, but whether she'd learned anything real from the past few months of transformation. The old Victoria, the one who'd been shaped by 2 years of suspicious isolation, might have wondered. But the woman who'd watched Daniel coach soccer practice for free, who'd seen him stay late to help struggling students with their science projects, who'd witnessed the genuine love between him and Emma, knew better. "No," she said firmly, "I think you're the first person in 2 years who's cared about my children without wanting anything in return except their happiness. I think you're exactly what Richard would have wanted for us, someone who loves authentically instead of strategically." Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his expression remained troubled. "Then why are we talking about ending this? Why are we letting some rich lawyers decide what's best for our families?" "Because," Victoria said, standing to face him directly, "if I fight this battle and lose, Lily and Oliver will end up with Eleanor Ashford, who sees them as social accessories rather than children. If I give up our friendship now, I can probably convince the court that I've recognized my mistakes and returned to appropriate behavior." "And what about what the kids want?" Daniel demanded. "What about what they need? Emma hasn't stopped talking about the sleepover you promised her. Your twins light up when they see our house because it's the first place they've ever felt normal. You're going to sacrifice all of that because some judge might think we're inappropriate?" Victoria felt the weight of every impossible choice she'd faced since Richard's death pressing down on her shoulders. "I'm trying to think like a mother instead of like a woman. I have to put their security above my happiness." "Their security?" Daniel's voice rose with frustration. "Victoria, I've seen those kids. Before they met Emma, they were like little robots programmed to be perfect. Now they laugh, they make messes, they argue about soccer strategies and get excited about science projects. Which version is more secure? The one where they're protected from everything, or the one where they're prepared for anything?" The conversation was interrupted by Emma running over, her face flushed with excitement from playing tag with Lily and Oliver. "Daddy, can we have pizza for dinner? And can Lily and Oliver come? Mrs. Victoria said maybe they could stay for a sleepover this weekend." Victoria watched Daniel's face as he looked down at his daughter, saw the exact moment when he understood the full scope of what they were facing. Emma's innocent excitement represented everything that was about to be destroyed, not just the relationship between adults, but the friendship between children who'd found something rare and precious in each other. "We'll see, sweetheart," Daniel said gently. "Go tell Lily and Oliver it's time to head home." As Emma scampered away, Daniel turned back to Victoria with new resolve in his expression. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." "I'm listening." "What if we get married?" Victoria felt her heart stop. "What?" "Think about it," Daniel continued, his words coming faster as the idea developed. "Blackstone's whole case is based on you making irrational decisions and being influenced by an inappropriate relationship. But if we're married, If we're a legitimate family unit, it becomes much harder for him to argue that our relationship is harmful to the children. Daniel, you can't be serious. Marriage as a legal strategy? That's exactly the kind of calculating behavior that got us into this mess. Is it? Daniel challenged. Or is it two people who care about each other choosing to fight for their families instead of surrendering to other people's prejudices? Victoria, I'm not proposing because of your money or your legal problems. I'm proposing because somewhere between that car accident and watching our kids become best friends, I fell in love with you. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. You fell in love with me? With all of you, Daniel said simply. With the woman who makes terrible pancakes because she wants to cook for her children. With the mother who's brave enough to tear down walls that were protecting her kids from living. With the person who chose happiness over security and authenticity over appearances. I fell in love with the family you're becoming, and I want to be part of it. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. You fell in love with me? With all of you, Daniel said simply. With the woman who makes terrible pancakes because she wants to cook for her children. With the mother who's brave enough to tear down walls that were protecting her kids from living. With the person who chose happiness over security and authenticity over appearances. I fell in love with the family you're becoming, and I want to be part of it. Victoria stared at him, her mind reeling with the implications of what he was suggesting. Marriage wouldn't solve everything. Blackstone would just argue that you pressured me into it, that I'm so unstable I made an even more irrational decision. Maybe, Daniel agreed, but it would also show the court that you're not alone, that you have a partner who shares responsibility for the children's welfare. And more importantly, it would show Lily and Oliver that love is worth fighting for, that family isn't just about blood or money, but about choosing to stay together when things get difficult. Victoria looked across the playground, where their children were reluctantly gathering their belongings, Emma chattering excitedly, while Lily and Oliver listened with the careful attention of kids who'd learned that good things often ended abruptly. The sight of them together, so natural, so right, made her chest ache with possibility and terror in equal measure. You're asking me to risk everything, she said quietly. Your reputation, your business, Emma's security. If this backfires, Blackstone won't just go after me. He'll destroy you too. Daniel reached for her hands, his calloused fingers intertwining with her manicured ones in a gesture that perfectly symbolized the gap they were trying to bridge. Victoria, I've been a single father for 4 years. I've built a business from nothing, raised a daughter through the loss of her mother, and learned that the only real security comes from loving people who love you back. I'm not asking you to risk everything. I'm asking you to bet everything on us. The proposal was insane, impractical, and completely contrary to every piece of legal advice Victoria had received. It would escalate the conflict with Blackstone, potentially expose Daniel and Emma to scrutiny they didn't deserve, and might ultimately fail to protect any of them from the forces determined to tear their families apart. But as Victoria looked into Daniel's eyes, she saw something she'd almost forgotten existed. Faith in the power of love to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. He was offering her what Richard would have wanted her to find, a partner willing to fight for their children's happiness instead of simply protecting their inheritance. If we do this, Victoria said slowly, we do it for the right reasons, not as a legal strategy, but as a commitment to building the kind of family our children deserve. Can you promise me that? Daniel smiled, with the same genuine warmth that had first caught her attention in the aftermath of a car accident, which now seemed like destiny rather than coincidence. Victoria Chen Ashford, will you marry me because I love you, because I love your children, and because I believe we can build something beautiful together despite everyone who thinks we shouldn't? The use of her maiden name, the acknowledgement of who she'd been before wealth complicated everything, made Victoria's answer clear. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, yes, I'll marry you. As their children ran toward them across the playground, unaware that the adults had just made a decision that would change all their lives forever,
Victoria realized she was about to discover whether love really could triumph over money, whether authenticity could overcome appearances, and whether a family built on choice could prove stronger than one maintained by obligation. The Crystal Springs courthouse had never felt more intimidating than it did on the morning of the custody hearing. Its marble columns and imposing architecture designed to remind everyone that justice here was administered by those who understood power and its proper distribution. Victoria walked up the steps, holding Daniel's hand, both of them flanked by children who'd been coached to present their best behavior but couldn't quite hide their confusion about why their friendship required legal validation. They had married in a quiet ceremony 3 days earlier, witnessed only by Amanda Sterling and Mrs. Rodriguez from Daniel's neighborhood, who had insisted on bringing homemade tamales to celebrate the union. The marriage certificate in Victoria's purse felt both like armor and a target, proof of their commitment to each other, but also evidence that would either vindicate or condemn them in the eyes of the court.
Jonathan Blackstone had arrived early, his silver hair and expensive suit radiating the kind of authority that came from generations of legal victories. Beside him sat Eleanor Ashford, impeccably dressed and wearing the expression of a woman who'd never doubted her right to determine other people's destinies. Their legal team filled an entire row, briefcases and documents arranged with military precision. "They look confident," Daniel observed quietly as they took their seats on the opposite side of the courtroom. "They should," Victoria replied, watching Blackstone review his notes with satisfied efficiency. "They've had 2 years to build their case about my incompetence. We've had 3 days to prove we're a real family." Judge Margaret Patterson entered the courtroom with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd presided over too many family disputes and understood that children's futures hung in the balance of adult decisions. Her reputation for fairness was legendary, but so was her intolerance for anything that appeared to put adult interests above children's welfare. Blackstone's opening statement was a masterpiece of legal manipulation disguised as concerned advocacy. He painted a picture of Victoria as a grieving widow whose judgment had been compromised by isolation and vulnerability, making increasingly erratic decisions that endangered her children's security and social development. "Your Honor," Blackstone said, his voice carrying the weight of generations of Ashford legal victories. "Mrs. Ashford's recent behavior demonstrates a pattern of instability that culminated in an impulsive marriage to a man she barely knows. She's dismissed professional security, enrolled the children in inadequate schools, and exposed them to influences that can only be described as beneath their station." He presented photograph after photograph of Lily and Oliver at the community center, at Daniel's house, playing with children whose families couldn't afford the kind of protection and opportunities the Ashford fortune could provide. Each image was framed as evidence of negligence, as if happiness itself was somehow proof of poor judgment. "These children deserve stability, Your Honor. They deserve the kind of guidance that comes from understanding their responsibilities and preparing them for the roles they'll inherit. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford has generously offered to provide the consistent, appropriate environment that her daughter-in-law has proven unable to maintain." Eleanor's testimony was delivered with the calm authority of someone who'd never questioned her own righteousness. She spoke about family traditions, social obligations, and the importance of proper education with the certainty of someone who'd never considered that her version of proper might not be the only valid approach to raising children. "Victoria is a lovely woman," Eleanor said with practiced kindness, "but she's simply overwhelmed by responsibilities she wasn't raised to handle. The children need structure, tradition, and the kind of social preparation that will serve them throughout their lives. I can provide those things." When Thomas Hartwell began Victoria's defense, he focused on her business acumen, her financial stability, and her genuine love for her children. But Victoria could see that purely legal arguments weren't going to be enough. The judge's expression remained neutral, but her questions suggested skepticism about Victoria's recent decisions. Mrs. Cooper, Judge Patterson said, using Victoria's new married name with careful precision, can you explain why you felt it necessary to make such dramatic changes to your children's lifestyle and then enter into marriage with someone you'd known for only a few months? Victoria stood to address the court, her heart pounding as she realized this was the moment that would determine her family's future. Instead of the carefully rehearsed response her lawyers had prepared, she found herself speaking from the heart about what she learned through losing everything and finding it again. Your Honor, 2 years ago, I lost my husband in a helicopter crash. In my grief and fear, I built walls around my children that I thought would protect them from further loss. I hired the best tutors, the most professional caregivers, the most comprehensive security. I gave them every advantage money could buy, except the one thing they needed most, the freedom to be children. She gestured toward Lily and Oliver, who sat in the front row looking small but determined. I didn't realize I was teaching them to be suspicious of everyone's motives, to measure their worth by their family's wealth, to see the world as threatening rather than wonderful. It took meeting Daniel Cooper and his daughter Emma to understand what I'd done wrong. Victoria's voice grew stronger as she continued. Daniel didn't know who I was when he helped me after my accident. He saw someone who needed assistance and provided it without expecting anything in return. When his daughter invited my children to play, it wasn't because she wanted access to our fortune. It was because she saw 2 lonely kids who needed friends. For the first time since their father died, Lily and Oliver experienced unconditional acceptance. Judge Patterson leaned forward slightly, her attention clearly caught by Victoria's passionate explanation. And the marriage, Mrs. Cooper? How do you address the concern that this was an impulsive decision made under legal pressure? I married Daniel because he showed me what my children had been missing, a father figure who valued their character over their inheritance, who encouraged their natural talents instead of molding them for social expectations. Victoria's voice caught slightly as she continued. Richard would have wanted them to have that kind of love in their lives again.
Daniel was called to testify next, and his presence at the witness stand created a striking contrast to the polished lawyers who'd preceded him. His work clothes and calloused hands marked him clearly as someone who didn't belong in Crystal Springs legal circles, but his quiet dignity commanded attention. "Mr. Cooper," Blackstone said during cross-examination, his tone suggesting he was about to spring a trap, "isn't it true that marrying Mrs. Ashford provides you with access to wealth and social position you could never achieve on your own?" Daniel's response was immediate and unflinching. "Sir, I was supporting myself and my daughter just fine before I met Victoria's family. I don't need her money, and I don't want her social position. What I want is to help raise 4 children who understand that their worth comes from their character, not their bank accounts." "4 children?" Judge Patterson interjected with interest. "Emma, Lily, Oliver, and the baby Victoria and I are hoping to have together," Daniel replied, causing a stir throughout the courtroom. "We want to build a family where all the children learn that love multiplies when you share it, that helping others is more important than impressing them, and that real security comes from knowing you're valued for who you are." "4 children?" Judge Patterson interjected with interest. "Emma, Lily, Oliver, and the baby Victoria and I are hoping to have together," Daniel replied, causing a stir throughout the courtroom. "We want to build a family where all the children learn that love multiplies when you share it, that helping others is more important than impressing them, and that real security comes from knowing you're valued for who you are." The revelation of their hopes for future children clearly surprised Blackstone, whose case had been built on the assumption that this was a marriage of convenience rather than genuine commitment. Eleanor's face showed the first crack in her composed facade as she realized that her attempt to reclaim control might result in even less access to her grandchildren. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Emma Cooper, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery, suddenly stood up and addressed the judge directly with the fearless honesty that only 7-year-olds possess. "Your Honor," Emma said, her clear voice carrying across the silent courtroom, Lily and Oliver are my best friends, and Mr. Victoria is the nicest lady ever, and my daddy is the best daddy in the world. We're all family now, and families stick together no matter what. That's what my mommy taught me before she went to heaven, and that's what Mr. Victoria's husband probably taught her too. Judge Patterson's attempt to maintain judicial composure cracked slightly at Emma's earnest declaration. "And why do you think they should all stay together, Emma?" Emma replied, with the simple wisdom of childhood. "Because they make each other happy," Emma replied, "and because when people love each other for real, not for pretend, they should get to be together always." As Emma sat back down, Victoria realized that her 7-year-old stepdaughter had articulated what all the legal arguments had failed to capture, that family was built through choice and sustained through love, not maintained through obligation or controlled through wealth. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Patterson prepared to render her decision, and Victoria understood that the next few minutes would determine whether love really could triumph over power, whether authenticity could overcome appearances, and whether the family they'd chosen to create would be allowed to survive the forces determined to destroy it. Judge Patterson's deliberation lasted 43 minutes. 43 minutes during which Victoria's entire world hung in suspension, every second stretching like an eternity while lawyers shuffled papers and Lily and Oliver sat with the careful stillness of children who understood that adults were deciding their fate. When the judge finally returned to her bench, her expression was unreadable, the mask of judicial neutrality giving no hint of the decision that would either unite their family or tear it apart forever. "This case has required me to consider fundamental questions about what constitutes a child's best interests," Judge Patterson began, her voice carrying the weight of precedent and the burden of wisdom earned through years of impossible decisions. "I've heard arguments about financial security, social standing, educational opportunities, and family traditions. I've also heard testimony about love, authenticity, growth, and the courage required to change when change serves our children's welfare." Victoria felt Daniel's hand tighten around her as the judge continued, each word carrying the power to reshape their lives. "Mr. Blackstone has presented a compelling case that Mrs. Cooper made dramatic changes to her children's lifestyle without adequate consideration of potential consequences. The photographic evidence shows children who appear less protected, less formally educated, and certainly less isolated than they were under their previous arrangements." Eleanor Ashford's slight smile suggested confidence in victory, while Blackstone's team exchanged satisfied glances. Victoria's heart began to sink as she realized the judge was validating their arguments about her supposed failures as a mother. "However," Judge Patterson continued, and that single word changed the entire atmosphere in the courtroom, "I've also observed something that Mr. Blackstone's evidence inadvertently revealed. In every photograph of Lily and Oliver taken during this period of supposed neglect, I see children who are genuinely happy. I see spontaneous laughter, natural interaction with peers, and the kind of unguarded joy that cannot be fabricated or performed." The judge lifted one of Blackstone's exhibits, a photograph of Lily covered in paint during an art class at the community center, her face radiant with creative excitement. This image was presented as evidence of inadequate supervision and inappropriate environments. "I see a child discovering her passion, surrounded by other children who share her interests, guided by adults who clearly care about her development as a person rather than her development as an heir." Victoria felt tears begin to flow as Judge Patterson examined another photograph, Oliver helping Daniel repair a bicycle in the garage, both of them focused intently on their work while Emma provided unsolicited advice from the sidelines. Mr. Blackstone argued that exposing the children to working-class environments was beneath their station. I would argue that teaching children to work with their hands, to solve problems through effort rather than expenditure, and to value relationships over transactions is preparation for any station in life. Eleanor's confident expression began to falter as the judge's reasoning became clear. She had expected the court to validate traditional notions of proper child-rearing, to confirm that wealth and social standing were the primary requirements for good parenting.
The marriage between Mrs. Cooper and Mr. Cooper has been characterized as impulsive and potentially manipulative, Judge Patterson continued. I had the opportunity to observe both parties under oath, to hear their explanations for their choices, and to witness their interaction with all 4 children who would be affected by this court's decision. The judge paused, making notes on her legal pad while the courtroom waited in absolute silence. What I observed was not manipulation or opportunism, but rather 2 single parents who have found in each other the partnership necessary to raise emotionally healthy children. Mr. Cooper's testimony revealed no knowledge of or interest in the Ashford family's specific financial holdings. His concern was entirely focused on the children's well-being and his role in supporting it. Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly, but Victoria could see he was still braced for the possibility that good intentions might not be enough to overcome legal precedent and social pressure. The question before this court is not whether Lily and Oliver Ashford can be provided with material advantages. Clearly, any of the proposed arrangements would ensure their financial security. The question is which arrangement will best serve their emotional, psychological, and moral development into healthy, contributing adults. Judge Patterson looked directly at Eleanor Ashford as she continued. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford's offer to assume custody comes from genuine concern for her grandchildren's welfare. Her resources are substantial, her intentions are honorable, and her ability to provide traditional advantages is unquestionable. However, her testimony revealed a worldview that measures children's success primarily through social achievement and conformity to established expectations. Eleanor's face tightened with displeasure at this assessment, but she maintained her composure with the discipline of someone accustomed to public scrutiny. Mrs. Victoria Cooper's approach to parenting has indeed changed dramatically since her husband's death. The evidence shows that she initially responded to grief by creating an isolated, highly controlled environment for her children. Her recent decisions to integrate them into broader community life, to encourage authentic peer relationships, and to marry someone who shares her evolving values represent a fundamental shift in her parenting philosophy. Victoria held her breath as the judge reached the crucial moment of decision. The question is whether this shift represents instability and poor judgment, as Mr. Blackstone argues, or growth and adaptive wisdom, as Mrs. Cooper claims. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, I find that Mrs. Cooper's changes demonstrate exactly the kind of responsive parenting that children need. The ability to recognize when protective measures become barriers to healthy development, and the courage to prioritize children's emotional needs over social expectations. The words hit Victoria like a physical release of tension she'd been carrying for months. Judge Patterson was not just ruling in her favor, she was validating the difficult journey Victoria had taken to understand what her children truly needed. Furthermore, the judge continued, the integration of the Cooper family appears to have provided Lily and Oliver with the kind of stable, loving environment that Mr. Blackstone claims they were lacking. Emma Cooper's testimony, while unconventional, demonstrated the natural family bonds that have developed between all 4 children. The court finds that these relationships serve the children's best interests far better than the formal, distant arrangements that characterized their previous lifestyle. Eleanor Ashford's face had gone pale with shock and disappointment, the reality of her defeat settling over her like a cold weight. Blackstone whispered urgently in her ear, probably discussing appeals and alternative strategies, but Victoria could see that something fundamental had shifted in the older woman's expression. The court therefore denies Mr. Blackstone's petition for custody modification. Lily and Oliver Ashford will remain with their mother, Victoria Cooper, and her husband, Daniel Cooper. The court further orders that all parties work together to ensure that the children maintain appropriate contact with their extended Ashford family, provided such contact supports rather than undermine the family structure that has been established. Judge Patterson's gavel came down with finality, but instead of the sharp crack Victoria had expected, it sounded like a door opening rather than closing. Around them, the courtroom erupted in quiet conversations and shuffling papers, but Victoria was only aware of Daniel's arms around her, and the sight of their children, all four of them, embracing in the gallery with the unconscious joy of kids who knew, somehow, that the adults had finally gotten something right. As they prepared to leave the courtroom, Eleanor Ashford approached them with hesitant steps, her usual commanding presence subdued by the weight of her loss and perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Victoria," she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual authority, "perhaps we could discuss how I might be part of their lives in a way that honors what you've built here." The olive branch was small and tentative, but it represented something Victoria had never expected, the possibility that even Eleanor might be capable of growth, of learning that love could take forms she'd never previously recognized or valued. Standing in the marble hallway of the Crystal Springs courthouse, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and fought to protect, Victoria understood that they'd achieved something rare and precious. They'd proven that authenticity could triumph over appearances, that chosen family could be stronger than inherited obligation, and that love really could overcome the forces that sought to diminish it. The battle was over, but their real work, building a life together based on the values they'd fought to defend, was just beginning.
18 months after Judge Patterson's ruling, the Cooper family had created something that neither Victoria nor Daniel could have imagined in their separate struggles as single parents, a home where wealth served joy rather than replacing it, where children learned responsibility through contribution rather than obligation, and where love multiplied through sharing rather than dividing through protection. The transformation was most visible in their living situation. Instead of rattling around the 43-room Ashford mansion, they had moved to a sprawling farmhouse on 20 acres just outside Crystal Springs, close enough to maintain business connections but far enough to create their own rhythm of life. The house was large enough for privacy when needed, but designed around gathering spaces where the family naturally congregated. A kitchen where everyone helped with meal preparation, a living room where homework happened alongside Daniel's woodworking projects, and a wraparound porch where evening conversations stretched long past reasonable bedtimes. Emma, now 9 and blossoming into a confident leader, had taken naturally to her role as big sister to Lily and Oliver, though the age differences were minimal. She helped Lily navigate the social complexities of middle school with the wisdom of someone who'd learned early that authenticity mattered more than popularity. She challenged Oliver's tendency toward perfectionism by demonstrating that mistakes were opportunities rather than failures, teaching him to laugh at his own intensity in ways that freed him to take creative risks. Lily's artistic talents had flourished beyond anyone's expectations under the guidance of local artists who valued expression over technique, community over competition. Her paintings now decorated not just their home, but the walls of the community center, the library, and several local businesses whose owners had fallen in love with her unique perspective on ordinary life. More importantly, she'd learned to use her art as a bridge between worlds, creating pieces that honored both her privileged background and her growing understanding of broader human experience. Oliver had discovered that his mathematical brilliance combined beautifully with Daniel's practical problem-solving approach, leading to a partnership that produced everything from more efficient chicken coop designs to solar panel installations that helped neighbors reduce their energy costs. His academic achievements remained exceptional, but they were now balanced by an understanding that intelligence was meant to serve others rather than simply distinguish oneself from them. The fourth child Victoria and Daniel had hoped for had arrived 6 months earlier, baby Sarah, named for both Richard's first wife and the new beginning her birth represented. The baby's presence had completed their family in ways that went beyond simple addition. Watching Daniel cradle their daughter with the same gentle attention he gave Emma, seeing Lily and Oliver compete to help with feeding and diaper changes, witnessing Emma's protective pride in her baby sister, these moments reminded Victoria daily that love really did multiply when shared generously. Victoria's approach to business had evolved as dramatically as her approach to parenting. She still ran Ashford Technology with the same innovative vision that had built the company's success, but she'd restructured operations to include worker profit sharing, community investment programs, and educational initiatives that benefited families like the one Daniel had grown up in. The company's motto had changed from excellence through innovation to technology that serves community, reflecting a shift in priorities that had only strengthened their market position. Daniel's construction business had grown from a one-man operation to a respected company that specialized in sustainable building practices and affordable housing projects. Victoria's business expertise had helped him expand strategically without losing the personal touch that made his work distinctive, while his commitment to serving working families had reminded her that success was measured by lives improved rather than profits maximized. Their marriage had deepened through the daily work of blending two families, two economic backgrounds, and two different approaches to almost everything, from discipline to dinner planning. They'd learned to navigate disagreements about spending priorities, educational choices, and social obligations with the patience of people who understood that their differences were strengths rather than problems to be solved. The most unexpected development had been Eleanor Ashford's gradual integration into their extended family. The custody battle had shattered her assumptions about proper parenting, forcing her to confront the possibility that her rigid notions of appropriate behavior had actually limited rather than enhanced her grandchildren's development. Her weekly visits had evolved from formal inspections to genuine participation in family life, though she still struggled with the chaos that characterized their household. "I don't understand how you can allow the children to paint in the dining room," Eleanor had said during a recent visit, watching Lily and Emma collaborate on a mural that was gradually covering one entire wall. "Because it makes them happy," Victoria had replied simply, "and because the dining room is for living, not just for impressing visitors." Eleanor's slow adaptation had become a source of hope for Victoria, proof that even the most entrenched attitudes can change when confronted with the evidence of their limitations. Her grandmother's tentative acceptance meant that Lily and Oliver maintained a connection to their Ashford heritage while building their identities around Cooper family values. The children's academic and social development had exceeded every measure Dr. Hendricks used to evaluate healthy adjustment. Their standardized test scores remained in the highest percentiles, but more importantly, their emotional intelligence assessments showed remarkable growth in empathy, resilience, and social leadership. They'd learned to navigate between worlds, comfortable at both country club charity events and community center fundraisers, equally at ease discussing technology trends with business leaders and building projects with neighborhood contractors.
Emma's influence on this development couldn't be overstated. Her natural confidence and inclusive instincts had taught Lily and Oliver that social skills were about making others feel valued rather than demonstrating one's own superiority. Through her example, they'd learned that popularity based on authentic kindness lasted longer and felt better than attention based on wealth or status. The community center where Emma had first invited Lily and Oliver to play had become a second home for their family. Victoria served on the board, contributing both financial resources and strategic planning expertise to expand programming for children and families. Daniel taught woodworking classes for teenagers, passing on both practical skills and the satisfaction that came from creating useful things with one's own hands. The children participated in everything from soccer leagues to science fairs to community theater productions, building friendships that crossed every social and economic boundary. Their home had become a gathering place for neighborhood families, particularly on weekends, when the large kitchen and open floor plan accommodated the kind of casual entertaining that Victoria had never experienced in her previous life. Children from school appeared for impromptu sleepovers, parents lingered over coffee while kids played in the yard, and holiday celebrations included whoever needed a place to belong rather than just family members who met social expectations. The most profound change was in Victoria herself. The woman who had once measured her worth by stock portfolios and social connections now found satisfaction in smaller but more meaningful achievements, helping Emma with a difficult math concept, teaching Lily to change a car tire, watching Oliver explain scientific principles to younger children with patient enthusiasm, or simply holding baby Sarah while Daniel read bedtime stories to the older children. She'd learned that wealth was most valuable when it freed people to focus on relationships rather than survival, when it enabled choices rather than demanding conformity, when it served love rather than replacing it. The Ashford fortune remained substantial, but it now functioned as a tool for creating opportunities rather than a burden that required protection from authentic human connection. Looking back on the journey that had brought them to this point, Victoria understood that losing control of her carefully planned life had been the beginning of finding the life she'd actually wanted. The accident that introduced her to Daniel, the custody battle that forced her to choose her values over her fears, the gradual creation of a family built on choice rather than obligation, each challenge had stripped away something that felt essential but proved to be merely decorative. Standing on their porch as evening settled over their property, watching Daniel push baby Sarah in the swing he'd built, while Emma, Lily, and Oliver chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, Victoria knew they'd achieved something precious and rare. They'd built a life where love was both the foundation and the goal, where wealth served happiness rather than defining it, and where family meant choosing each other every day regardless of the obstacles the world placed in their path. 5 years after that rainy Tuesday morning when a delivery truck changed the trajectory of Victoria's life, she stood before a packed auditorium at the annual Crystal Springs Women's Leadership Conference, preparing to deliver a speech that would challenge everything her audience believed about success, security, and the true meaning of wealth. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was speaking to the same social circle that had once defined her worth by her ability to navigate their expectations rather than her courage to question them. The audience represented the pinnacle of achievement in their community: CEOs, board members, philanthropists, and social leaders who controlled millions of dollars and influenced countless decisions. They had come expecting inspiration about breaking glass ceilings and maximizing opportunities, the traditional narrative of women's empowerment through professional advancement and financial independence. Instead, Victoria chose to tell them about the day she discovered that having everything meant nothing if it prevented her children from experiencing authentic love. 3 years ago, she began, my 8-year-old son asked me why people always seemed disappointed after they got what they wanted. I realized he was describing not just the wealthy families in our social circle, but his own experience of a life that provided every material advantage except the one thing that mattered most: the freedom to be genuinely happy. She paused, watching faces in the audience as they processed this unexpected beginning. Many of these women had made similar sacrifices, choosing security over spontaneity, status over satisfaction, achievement over authentic connection. I want to tell you about the moment I understood that protecting my children from the world was actually preventing them from learning how to live in it. It happened when I watched my daughter paint with finger paints for the first time at age 8, her face radiating joy I hadn't seen since her father died 2 years earlier. I realized that in my desperate attempt to give her every advantage, I had forgotten to give her permission to be a child. Victoria shared the story of their transformation: the car accident that introduced her to Daniel, the gradual recognition that her children withering in their golden cage, the terrifying decision to choose authenticity over appearance, love over security. She spoke about the custody battle that forced her to defend her right to prioritize her children's emotional health over their social standing.
The lawyers argued that I was exposing my children to inappropriate influences by allowing them to form friendships with families who couldn't provide the same opportunities we could. But I had learned something those lawyers didn't understand: that the most important opportunities aren't the ones money can buy. They're the chances to experience unconditional acceptance, to contribute meaningfully to others' lives, to understand that your worth isn't determined by what you possess, but by who you choose to become.
She described the daily reality of their blended family, the chaos and compromise, the laughter and occasional tears, the gradual understanding that love really did multiply when shared generously rather than hoarded protectively. She talked about watching Emma teach Lily that mistakes were opportunities for growth, about seeing Oliver learn from Daniel that intelligence was meant to serve others rather than elevate oneself above them. "My husband didn't marry me for my money," Victoria said, noting the surprised murmurs that rippled through the audience. "He married me because he saw a woman struggling to become the mother her children needed, and he wanted to be part of that transformation. He taught me that the greatest gift you can give a child isn't financial security. It's the example of an adult who chooses love over fear, growth over safety, authentic connection over comfortable isolation." The speech's turning point came when Victoria addressed the fundamental misconception that had driven her earlier choices and continued to influence many of the women in her audience. "We've been taught that providing for our children means giving them every advantage money can buy, the best schools, the most exclusive opportunities, the highest level of protection from life's difficulties. But I learned that true provision means preparing them to navigate the world with open hearts and strong values. It means teaching them that their privilege comes with responsibility, that their advantages are meant to be shared, that their security should enable generosity rather than justify selfishness." She shared specific examples of how their family's approach to wealth had evolved: the technology scholarships that gave underprivileged students access to educational opportunities, the affordable housing projects that Daniel's company built in partnership with community organizations, the art programs that Lily helped develop for children whose families couldn't afford private lessons. "Our children are learning that wealth is a tool, not a destination. They understand that their inheritance isn't just financial, it's the responsibility to use whatever resources they have to create opportunities for others. They're growing up knowing that the measure of their success won't be what they accumulate, but what they contribute." Victoria's voice grew stronger as she approached the speech's central message, the universal truth that had emerged from their family's journey. The greatest poverty isn't the lack of money, it's the absence of authentic connection. The most dangerous protection isn't the failure to provide security, it's the success in preventing growth. The deepest failure isn't the inability to give our children everything they want, it's the inability to teach them that what they need most cannot be purchased. She described the transformation in her children that had validated every difficult choice they'd made. Lily's confidence in sharing her artistic talents with others, regardless of their ability to reciprocate with equal sophistication. Oliver's leadership in tutoring younger students who struggled with concepts he found easy. Emma's natural inclusion of children who might otherwise be overlooked or excluded. Baby Sarah's development in an environment where her siblings modeled generosity and acceptance rather than competition and judgment. They're learning that family isn't defined by blood or bank accounts, but by the daily choice to show up for each other. They understand that love isn't a finite resource that diminishes when shared, but an infinite capacity that grows stronger through expression. They know that their worth isn't determined by external validation, but by their commitment to treating others with dignity and respect. Victoria's conclusion challenged her audience to examine their own definitions of success and consider whether their protective instincts might be limiting their children's potential for authentic happiness. I'm not suggesting that financial security doesn't matter or that privilege doesn't provide real advantages. I'm saying that these benefits are meaningless if they prevent our children from developing the emotional intelligence, social consciousness, and moral courage they'll need to create lives of genuine significance. The question isn't whether we can afford to give our children everything, it's whether we can afford not to teach them that everything they truly need already exists within their capacity to love and be loved. As Victoria left the podium, she was approached by dozens of women whose questions revealed their own struggles with similar choices.
Executive mothers who worked 80-hour weeks to provide opportunities they were too busy to enjoy with their children. Philanthropists who gave generously to causes but struggled to connect authentically with their own families. Community leaders whose public success masked private doubts about whether they were raising children who understood the difference between privilege and purpose. That evening, back home in their farmhouse kitchen, where Daniel was helping Emma with algebra while Lily painted and Oliver built a model airplane, Victoria understood that their story wasn't unique in its challenges, but in its resolution. Many families face the choice between security and authenticity, between protection and growth, between comfort and courage. What made their journey special wasn't the obstacles they'd overcome, but their willingness to choose love over fear at every crucial decision point. Watching her family, the one she'd lost and found and chosen and fought to protect, Victoria knew they'd discovered something precious that no amount of money could buy and no external force could take away. They'd learned that the richest life wasn't the one with the most resources, but the one where those resources served love rather than replacing it. The Cooper family had proven that true wealth was measured not by what you could afford to buy, but by what you could afford to give away. Not by what you could protect your children from, but by what you could prepare them for. Not by the height of the walls you built, but by the bridges you helped them learn to cross. In the end, they discovered that love really was worth more than billions, because love was the only currency that appreciated through spending, the only investment that guaranteed returns, and the only inheritance that could never be lost or stolen or devalued by forces beyond their control. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.